much of it is not what you feel. You can see in thoughts. Is this really yours? Come and hold me now. I can make you feel.
Go ahead and get started here. I actually, as I was studying my notes, both the notes from the presentation I did at the Invitational about 2 months ago, and the notes I've put together since, where I've been trying to take this idea of thought forms and find other references to it in other ways that we could kind of analogistically think about all this stuff. Just trying to absorb all that. I put together a few slides. I don't want to be hampered by them. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time. The subject of this talk is the concept of thought forms, how they are described in a few different sources, most Confederation, but we'll be bringing in the work of Besant and Leadbeater from the Theosophical Society in their work, Thought Forms, and trying to connect their kind of two-part definition of thought forms as a form and a gradient or an atmosphere to some of the work that the High Altitude Receiving Center has done, that I only after the fact, only after I did the work on the original talk that we gave at the Invitational, only after that did I see these parallels. And what I'm hoping is not that I'm going to tell you how this stuff works. I don't know how this stuff works. I am trying to find patterns in the creation that can help us understand what we consider to be discrete phenomena as iterations of some deeper pattern. That is kind of the premise of the talk I'm giving. So it's a little bit speculative. It's going to stretch a little bit. And so if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, push back on me, challenge me. If you have another association that you see that you think might be pregnant with something that could help us understand mind and how mind works and how thought forms are this kind of configuration or product of mind, jump right in. All right. Can everybody see the slides here? Okay, I saw a thumb. I'm not going to be looking at the camera, so please use your words if you want to get in touch with me, because I don't have a big screen here. All right, let's see. So just a little bit of business. For those of you who are working group members, we're going to have an important meeting next month to talk about how we're going to think about going forward with our project. I'm seeing the current time we're in as an opportunity to kind of reconstitute ourselves, think about what everybody wants out of that, and move forward with that. So just if you can all make it on the first Sunday at this time, that'd be great. That's really the only business I have, so I'll jump right in. So the name of this talk is Thought Forms and Their Atmospheres. It's a curious way of talking about this concept. So I think there's a few questions that I would call out initially to sort of frame things. What is a thought form? Where do we get these definitions from? Like, how are we putting this together? And what parts of the sources are we using? Which are we maybe not incorporating? And what are the implications of this approach that I'm suggesting to thought forms for mind, for service, for polarity, all sorts of things? And my contention is that in the channel material from the Confederation, there are at least hints, if not outright statements of these things. I am putting together a definition of thought form that I've accrued from Ra, from the Besant and Leadbeater work, and from other Confederation sources that a thought form is essentially manifestation. It is a way in which mind, as the what you could consider to be the primary substrate of beingness in the illusion, in the creation, uh, brings focus to create an experience or an effect. Um, this this experience or effect is recognized according to Bazant and Leadbeater as having these two parts. And I think that these two parts are backed up in Confederation material if you read it a little bit liberally. So they say these two parts are a form. You can think of this form as a structure or some kind of coherence in whatever that mental space that forms, the pool of mind that we all partake of in creation. Um, this form would be a kind of position in it, or maybe position isn't the right word, but a kind of quasi location. Um, One of the things I'm thinking of is that what we consider to be time and space are primarily mental concepts that then precipitate into distorted forms, into the physical illusion that we see. Um, but as Edgar Casey's source always said, mind is builder. Mind is the level at which it's kind of, I see it as the root level of the creator's foray into mixing that which is with that which is not to create this illusion, one that both has aspects of reality. Like any illusion, it's not completely made up. It wouldn't be recognizable if it didn't have something that called to the inherent reality of things. But of course, it also has a lot of things that are distorted from the ideal and that give it particularity. So when thought occurs in this focused manner, it tends to have a form that gives it coherence and stability, positionality, and an atmosphere. Um, by atmosphere, what I mean is if the form is understood as like the discrete shape or volume, let's say, of the structure. And remember, we're using spatial concepts very liberally here. We're kind of gesturing towards a kind of spatiality that is more refined and ideal than ours. But in the same way that we can think of position and space in our mind, we experience that in the body. Um, the atmosphere is kind of like all of that negative space around these forms. So uh, in thought forms, Bazant and Leadbeater talk about the gradient being a kind of like square or cube based on the distance from the form. I think that's a little bit technical for a medium that we just don't understand that well. Um, I don't think you need to get that technical about it. The important thing is that these structures are only illusorily separated from each other and are illusorily in a kind of form as distinct from one another. The atmospheres are the radiating gradient from this kind of crystal of thought. And in fact, I would say that a crystal or a crystalline structure or entity in the raw contact, as they describe it, both as a person or sorry, a mind body spirit complex, or a crystal like a rock or something like that. That regularity calls to that perfect regularity of the ideal form that it is very closely adhering to. In fact, the one thing you could say about a crystal is that its regularity calls to that perfection because it's not completely perfect in manifestation, but it's very, very, very close. And so because of that, it has properties where it can, for example, refract rays that pass through it. Um, I wanted to expand upon that to say that perhaps the thought form or thinking in this kind of original sense, going all the way back to the thing that made our creation possible, the original thought, as Ra and others in the Confederation describe it. Um, is something that not every seemingly separate thing in the creation does. It is instead a special feature of those who are a logos, a sub logos, or a sub logos, and however further down that goes, we can't possibly understand. Um,
Jeremy,
yeah.
Barish has a question.
Okay. Yeah. I heard. I just wanted to finish my thought.
Okay.
Right ahead.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks. I was wondering, the notion of this atmosphere you're talking about, is that something specific to thought forms? It sounds like this is, I mean, the way you describe it almost feels like like something like an aura, like that all beings seem to have.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
I would, in fact, in the material that I've been involved in bringing through, auras, atmospheres are used interchangeably, and so we'll get there. Yeah, but you're right on the money. Yep.
Right.
And the idea, I think, just one more thing, we think of an aura as a thing that a being in manifestation emanates, right? It's like some sort of field around them that shows the colors of their thoughts and feelings and different qualities of their personality. That is a particular character of this more general case of the atmosphere or of a thought form. In other words, what I'm sort of thinking, and I don't know this for sure, but what I'm thinking is that it's because we create thought forms and we have thought forms created for us, as Ellie and I were talking about earlier. Our complexes of mind and body and spirit are themselves, at least in part, thought forms. They're structures that have this kind of like configuration to them, and particularly because they're complexes, they have parts to them, right? But each of these parts in the whole that the parts create also have a resonance that extends the field of their beingness outward. Um, hopefully, I'll have some other things to say about this. I feel like I'm getting bogged down right now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on unless there's other thoughts that people want to share right here. 2, 1. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to tell y'all all the sources that I've been taking into account. I really think that the Thought Forms book is a great book to read on this. It's also good to just sort of see the history of the thinking around this, because this is over 100 years old. You can see how it's one of the first attempts to marry the esoteric and the metaphysical with the growing physical sciences that were extant at the moment, especially like right at the time where they're talking about a lot of Maxwell's ideas on electromagnetism and all that. So that's where I think a lot of the excess scientism comes in there. But of course, I'm going to bring in some of the thoughts of Ra, of Kuo, and we'll get to some of the other guys too. All right, so from their work on thought forms, each definite thought produces a double effect. And they say definite thought. That's a loose term, I think. We can talk about thoughts that have more or less focus, and I think that gives us a kind of spectrum to talk about it. But a definite thought produces a double effect, a radiating vibration in a floating form. So this is a way in which thoughts can have coherence over time, and yet also have this kind of bleed through that allows for other constructs that mentate, that think, or that have been imbued with thought, like a thought form, to be affected by this stuff. And it happens as a function of vibration. It's important to understand that all of this is mind, or whatever mind is made of, vibrating. And it is this vibration that creates resonance, that creates the possibility for perception, for something, for a perception to be able to return through the field of this gradient and then affect our thoughts the same way that our thoughts affect others' thoughts. Perception being this kind of unique case of that, I'm suggesting. The way that people will sort of come to a consensus through sometimes what seems like very low communication, because the thoughts just become aligned through common desire, and in some cases, co-location, right? Proximity. Just a few ideas of how we can think broadly about this description. I wanted to bring in some Ra quotes at this point. I think this is a great example of how Ra thinks about the function of thought forms and how they relate to our reality. Because this is not something that's about thought, right? This is something that's very concrete when we're talking about rock. But notice that they talk about it's the regularity of the distortion, the regularity of the energy fields in that material that allow for the thought form to be better or less well resonated with that structure. In other words, it's not that you can't just say that it's the structure that's calling to the thought form. The thought form is also calling to the material structure. And it's almost like the material is forming imperfectly and sort of statistically around the force that the thought generates on some level that, we can't explain concretely right here. But this also gets to the idea of the crystalline, right? The thought form has the most crystalline potential, because, like, just imagine a square or a perfect circle. You can imagine a much more perfect circle than you can draw, or even that you can, like, observe in nature or anything. If you get down to the finest detail of how it manifests in the material world, there will always be some imperfections. And so what thought does is it allows for these ideal ideas to sort of be considered in that mental space, and then to have their issue in the manifestation as they attain coherence, as they attain focus. This is another Ra quote on thought forms. The thing that I thought was interesting here is the connection between probability and thinking. And this is something that Oksal in one of their latest sessions with us really placed an emphasis on, that it is thinking is not simply a creative act, ex nihilo, bringing things into manifestation. It's actually accessing the plenum of intelligent infinity and selecting from the infinite potential what to bring into manifestation. You can call it creative, right? Like, it depends on what direction you're looking at it from. In one sense, the creation is not created, Ra says. It's simply the creator exploring itself. So it's kind of the same thing. If the creator is just exploring all of its possibilities, then is anything really created? No, it's just chosen one over the other, because because it is the remove of other possibilities that brings a single possibility into its most creative focus, so that we can see its consequences, so we can see how it issues into the creator's experience of itself. All right, what is this one about? I think this is an interesting excerpt from Kuo, because it talks about how basic a concept the thought form is. They say, it would be easy to think of this as a powerful tool wielded by those with great degrees of will and articulation of more subtle energies. But this is not in fact not always so, my friends. The thought form is as sophisticated as the mind that made it, or minds which made it, and the power that redounds to those who can work with it, whether this be a manipulation or a skillful practice of interpolation, is part of the nature of mind. They go on to point out in here that there's a polarized use of thought forms that has nothing to do with the sophistication or power of the mind doing the thinking. The sincerity of the thought form can sometimes be a lot more powerful than the care of crafting, let me say. So, like, you have a magician who can like create a thought form, an intricate symbolic thought form to affect some kind of like change in the world that's very, very, very focused and has a lot of power to it because it's like an elephant standing on a pin, right? But you also have, like, let's say, thought forms around things like political candidates when there's strong emotions around it, and how these kinds of collective uh, uh, coherences to the emotions and thoughts start to create their own kind of power that is not so focused, but just through sheer volume, through sheer blunt force, make themselves known. The other thing I was interested in mentioning is that thought forms like aren't negated very easily. If you ever heard of that, don't think of a pink elephant idea, right? Like you can't do it. Once the suggestion has been made, mind sort of follows the suggestion until it's played out. And this is kind of like the sort of maybe you could say the virtue and the vice of the mind. Is that it is a very positivist instrument. It negates only with great care and thought, and this goes into some of the ways that thought forms are used magically. Although I don't think I'm going to elaborate on that unless you guys want me to. Anyway, let's see. Now this is some work we did this year. I was talking about why nature can be a different experience and a healing experience rather than urban areas. Excuse me. Essentially, nature is the result of thought forms that are closer to the logos or closer to the creator. Ours are farther away from the creator because we're farther down the chain of logos, sublogos, sub-sublogos. I call this the logoic chain. And so we have much more distortion in our thought forms. You'll notice that when we create things in the world, they tend to be regular, square. They don't have a lot of flow to them necessarily. Whereas nature has a lot more spontaneity and vitality. And it's not that one is better and one is worse. What Urkus and Munka were talking about, Urkus had a session about this too, was how we can work with our planet to help balance the imbalanced thought forms that exist in our world. Only by being able to walk in nature and notice and feel in to the character and quality of the thought forms that created that nature, can we then, as a member of the logoic chain, a mind, body, spirit complex, bring that feeling creatively into civilization and help balance some of those thought forms with the thought forms that we've learned more directly from the creator. Here is the Oxal session that talks about what thinking actually does. I'm just going to read this because I think it's pretty terse. Those of Oxal say, you create structures that give you articulable avenues into the plenum of potential, and it is your thought structures that call to the activation of potentials. For all of these potentials exist in simultaneity, and one of the features of the mind complex is its ability to bring what is in potentiation into actuality. And this is the thing we were talking about before. You call this creation, but it's somewhat of a misnomer, blah, blah, blah. For you are inclined to consider your thoughts as coming out of thin air, so to speak, and this is not the case. You simply, as a mind complex, let us say, have the ability to direct your little portion of the first distortion, a la our free will, of our creator to the magnification in time and awareness of a given sector of this thought edifice, this pre-existing plenum of potential. What they were trying to do in this session, in part, was distinguish between us as mind, body, spirit complexes, or sub-logoi, and thought forms. thought forms are created by members of the logoic chain. Members of the logoic chain are not created by thought forms. Thought forms do not have will. They can't sort of like perpetuate themselves indefinitely. And they are primarily ways in which we sort of, as agents of the creator's exploration of itself, project ourselves into that mystery of the creator as kind of the creator's eyes, the probes into itself, to experiment out, work with things, see the fruits that time and space allow us to sequentially observe. This is very abstract, and I don't know how concrete I'm going to be getting here. But anyway, are there any questions so far? Have I said anything intelligible? I will
Doing
take this.
good, Jeremy. Keep it
Okay,
up.
thank you. I much prefer that to the silence as assent. All right, so now we're moving on to these gradients or atmospheres or auras. Atmospheres was a term coined by those of Kuo, I believe first in the third channeling intensive, right from the get-go. I offered a definition. I wish I had talked to Steve, who channeled a lot of this, because I would have liked to have gotten his thoughts on this. But let's just use this for now. The atmosphere is kind of like the gradient reaching through the field of the creator from our thought forms. So we create thought forms. The thought forms have this structure, form, and this like indefinite, in some cases, infinite extension through the creator, right? Like there's no discrete end to this field or to this gradient. So it is kind of, in a way, philosophically, that negative space that it inhabits is all of the connective tissue of the creator that we are choosing to see as kind of separate from ourselves. And in fact, our attitude towards atmospheres, our atmospheres and others, has a lot to do with how we understand polarity. I'll get into that soon. In that session, Kuo says, experience requires an atmosphere for it to register in a resonant fashion, so that it informs both the life of the creature and the creator that lies within, without, and at the source of that creature. Notice that in this resonance, you have that kind of connective and going back up the chain concept. Resonance is a kind of vibratory characteristic that allows for like synchronization across distance, across different like sectors or densities. And so this resonance as a kind of feature of vibration is kind of like one of the unifying elements that ideally would bring us back to the original thought. The original thought being kind of like the initial resonant event, I would say, that then everything else is kind of commentary or distortion of. You have this, I sort of envision that you have this original thought, and then different levels of the logos are refining / distorting that in particular creative ways. We know we call it creative. It could also be called, different choices from the avenues of potential that this octave has made available. Probably should talk more in the experience thing. It is kind of a curious idea. And I don't know necessarily whether they're talking about experience in the broad sense, or if they're talking about experience in a much more archetypal fashion. I'm not sure it matters. But the idea being that when I think of experience, what I think is whether it's whether it's like experience juxtaposed with catalyst in that kind of tarot concept, or it's just experience in general, right? What it is it's this kind of harvest. It's what gets brought back to the creator that it cares about. Um, I, in that thought, what I'm probably not making clear is that I don't literally think that the creator benefits from me eating a sandwich, qua eating a sandwich. I think that what is valuable to the creator and what is not valuable to the creator in our experience is very, very, very mysterious. And obviously, there's a lot of detail in our lives that cannot reach the level of idealization and subtlety. Excuse me. That the create that would rise to the level of the creator's interest, I would presume. So, in the same way that like a flawed crystal will resonate less that vibration across creation, uh, our more mundane experiences are less resonant, our profound experiences more resonant. And of course, Ra talks about when archetypes are resonated as kind of like these absolutes in experience almost, right? That go to the core of the blueprint of creation that we occupy. Here we have some thoughts from Kuo building on this idea of auras or atmospheres as kind of the frontier of self other self delineation, um, and where one way to think about what they're saying here is what we see as service to the creator, whether that's service to self or service to others, is going to be in large part a function of how we relate to our auras abutting other auras, or our atmospheres, the gradients of our thought forms, how they encounter others, and what we do about that encounter, what we do about that mixture, where we consider the line to be, maybe as just a crude way of putting it. Is the line closer in? Is the line farther out? I'm sure if you have thought of service to self as this kind of desire to like pull all into the self, knowing the self as creator, versus service to others as this kind of radiating out to others, knowing that they are the creator like you, these two basic attitudes have some bearing on this sort of what I've called this negative space between thought forms. If the thought forms are occurring around logoic agents, then it almost is like the thought forms are kind of like your place on the game board, and so your proximity to another piece on the game board, um, in chess, if it's your piece, it's fine. If it's the other side's piece, depending on where you are, you could be in trouble. That really, really, really stupid example, but hopefully you can with me kind of riff on this and think about the different implications here. With service to others, of course, integration is always the task when these auras or atmospheres mix and blend with others, and there's a kind of catalyst at that boundary. The idea being to see it as self, even though it appears to be not self, or something that you don't want to be self. And I'd argue if you're service to self, then it's the exact opposite. To push the boundary to your liking, and to maintain the separation, as a matter of sheer will. There's another quote here from the earlier session. Uh, excuse me. Your service, whether intended as such consciously or not, provides a temporary demarcation by which a narrative of otherness can unfold. And it is this otherness that is of novel interest to the creator. So that's an interesting detail on that concept, that like the frontiers of this question of self or other uh, constitute a lot of the resonant experience that the creator is looking for, apparently, whatever that means, right? Like, it's so easy to speak broadly about this stuff, and I need to like emphasize over and over again that a lot of this is speculation, or we're putting together pieces that seem to go together, but maybe we're not seeing an important nuance that invalidates the comparison. So keep that in mind. Oh, here's another good quote. In other words, in the wake of the challenge of the will freed from what seems so obvious about your nature as creator, unleashed to be as it will. In this sense, you learn to recognize all these distinctions you have created as constitutive of a tone in the creator's scale, to be blessed, appreciated, to refract your love in a new way, and for you to not fear it for its newness, its novelty, and singularity of experience. Another example of the service to others attitude in the interpenetration of auras. Since we finally gotten to oh, that's all the slides I have. Since we finally gotten to auras, was there anything that you wanted to comment on, Barish?
I was just thinking of it as almost like a magnetic field, which kind of gets weaker as you go away from the center. But and like any field, each field interacts with one another, and depending on the proximity, depending on also on the intensity of it. So, you know, whether that is the aura of a person, whether that's the aura around the thought that is kind of you know, a being without, you know, a manifested body in a third dimensional reality, feels like the same thing, which is kind of, it has its own vibration and it's within a field, and that vibration interacts with the vibration around it.
Yeah, that's more or less how I see it too. I mean, with maybe one like little detail that's probably too nerdy, but the magnetic field, for example, is to me like a distortion of this more basic thought form gradient, right? It is a particular kind of this more general idea in the mind, right? So in physical, just like gravity is kind of like a particular manifestation of the more general idea of spiritual gravity or love, right? I'm trying to see if we can see a common root of phenomena in the mind, and thought forms can help us trace that connection, then I think we have the ability to see relationships in a new way that might be helpful to us in understanding our experiences, and most importantly, how to work with thought forms. Because those of Ra, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting over something. Those of Ra talk about how the purging of thought forms is a valuable thing that can be done by the adept in order to kind of cleanse their mind of things that are acting upon them in ways that they're no longer being the creative agent acting upon them. They're now acting upon you. And they certainly have that potential. And it's almost, it's funny because what does it mean to purge them? Are you simply getting a kind of distance from them in which their aura, you know what I mean? Like, are they getting farther away?
This phrase actually gets to it. I would love to get the others' thoughts too. Again, in my mind, purging is less of a separation, more of an integration. However, the integration is as you bring love to a thing, a thought, and even something that doesn't serve you, that love allows the healing to occur. So you're essentially kind of seeing the whole And then you can, once you see the whole, you can choose to have a different perspective on it. So if you have a thought or a belief that is not serving you, at least what you're seeing is a spectrum of potential. And then in that spectrum of potential, you can choose another aspect of that spectrum.
That's very well said. I like that. And that's that you are perfectly tuning into the way that I'm trying to think about this. We don't know this is the way that it is, but there's something about what you said that is true that we have a handle on now, and we can work with that. Hopefully, I mean, the idea would be to see if we can find ways in which these topics can be expanded on without making them kind of hobby horses of transient thinking, but instead, how do they inform our service? How do they inform our ability to accept and work with those things that we find difficult? So that's perfect. And you stated it great based on that quote from earlier, which is that it's a task of integration. So it's only purging in the sense that it's changing the relationship that it has with us, right? Instead of one of rejection, it's one of acceptance in this new light. Well done. I'm just going to look over my notes.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah, go right for it.
As you were talking, I was, I guess I was conceptualizing of something that I'm going to call guardrails. And I think when you mentioned the plenum, I thought, I don't know that I, as a 3D being, have access to all that is possible. Like, I feel like I have guardrails on what I can think of. And I don't know if that's salient at all.
Absolutely.
But I'm wondering, like, as a co-creator, pretty far down the logoic chain, if we do have those guardrails up for a reason, does that make sense? Like, what's the purpose of the guardrails? Did you run into any of that? And that's open for discussion. I don't know that I have an answer, but
I'll address it to the floor. Let me kick things off, and maybe others will have ideas.
There's silence.
Keep in mind that our experience of third density is a very novel one compared to others in this octave and others in past octaves. That is a result of our logos and sublogos. You can call it guardrails. You can call specific configurations that are not up for our negotiation. Remember that the archetypal mind is kind of like the blueprint for all mental activity, expenditures of energy, right? Like if mind is builder, then where is the energy originating, right? So the idea is that we do think along guardrails. However, I would point out that one of the things we learned in, it was either the second or the third intensive, was that a lot of what the function of the spirit complex is, as something distinct from mind complex, is the way that they described it. And I encourage you to go read this session. I think it's the third intensive session 6, but I could be wrong. It's on the complexity of the spirit. That's what it's called. And they say, like, the archetypal, I'm going to be very crude about this. The archetypal mind is created. Its ideas, its influence registers into the manifest creation through mind. So it comes into the densest form of mind that it possibly can, which is this material world. These are thoughts that are so dense that they have discrete position and they bump up against each other and they have these physical characteristics. This informs all of our experience. You can think of these rays reaching down into the depths of the unknown of the creator, the creator's unknown of itself. At some point, they can't go any further and they come back. But when they come back, they're coming back through our experiences. The archetypal mind kind of recovers all of the energies in their distinct hues that were issued, like let's say the 22 basic energies, right? It's putting the pieces back from where they came, from where they originally issued. But when they come back with more than what they went out. There's these remainders. There are these things that aren't easily reconciled with the archetypes. That's very much what the creator is after. They're after these new aspects that the archetypes could not capture in the creator's infinitude. And the spirit complex is the portion that is best at reconciling these irregularities, these ride-alongs on the return of the archetypal energies back to the creator. I don't think that's literally what's going on. I think it's a model for how to think about the relationship between the archetypal mind, manifestation, and the way experience informs the creator. And this is why we have the spirit complex, so that we can benefit from what is actually learned, since the archetypes constitute things that are not simply created but known about the self, right? They're the harvest. They're almost always the harvest of some previous creation or octave or something like that. Does that get to what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in a roundabout way, but yeah, I'll have to grok on that a little bit.
I encourage you to read the source. It says it much better than I do. Let's see. I don't really have any other remarks in particular, so please feel free to speak up.
it, so in my mind, if I kind of reflect on this and kind of think about what a thought form is, the way you said it in the beginning is also interesting, right? So like the whole creation is thought, and
Original thought.
the original thought, and then as co-creators, each of our thoughts are things, and they are energy. So and this is all kind of also proven, right? We are constantly emanating energy when we think, through these waves, various signatures, energy signatures, and as the material says, especially in the time space portion, thoughts are things. So they have their own. I mean, they have energy. So the part that I haven't fully grokked is, sometimes Ra would refer to thought forms as concrete. It's almost like it's unclear to me when thoughts have, like, you have a thought, almost thought separates from you, right? As energy. Does it, each, I guess, energy is conscious to a certain degree, just like any energy, everything is consciousness. At what stage does a thought form have self-consciousness is not very clear to me. Just like in third dimension and the 3D and onwards, consciousness has self-consciousness. Is there, what does that mean for thought forms is not super clear. But I do get the sense of, okay, as we put out thoughts, they are things, and energy just lives forever, just transforms sometimes, and the more thought we put on something, the more energy we're putting on it, either individually or collectively. So some of the concepts like werewolves, for instance, I think Rob mentions them as existing in thought form, because collectively we've been talking about it, dreaming about it, and so forth. So we're putting more and more energy into that concept. So anyway, so that's kind of my reflection.
So a few things. I would really point to the work of Jung on his work Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky. One of the points he makes, I think I've made this in the podcast before, is that at the original outset of the UFO phenomenon, almost never were people who were interested in UFOs contactees.
Mhm.
Now, that is if this were a projection of the collective unconsciousness, the way that we project in our individual unconscious into our conscious and have these experiences and confusion and stuff like that, that's exactly what you would expect. That's exactly how it would manifest if we thought of ourselves as a whole. We wouldn't be projecting our stress and our confusion into places where we would understand it or have a nice tight understand it isn't right, just have an explanation for it, right? We'd be doing it to people who have nothing to do with it and don't and are experiencing as freshly and as mysteriously and perhaps as scaredly as we would. Second thing, I do not think. Remember that I am going off a premise of the constraining definition of thought forms that I originally offered. I'm using that as a lens to look at thought forms. In my definition, it would be impossible for a thought form to have true self-consciousness. The reason is that it's not in the logoic chain, and therefore it has no access to the spirit complex. My theory is that it is the spirit complex that gives us self-awareness.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, in the mind-body complex of second density, right? You have this feedback loop. And mind is basically this thing that's like a plastic absorber of the sort of like visceral experience of being an animal or a plant, right? It's just taking the stuff in, but it has no ability to see the patterns to it of its own accord and then reason. It's only when you have a second feedback loop that can reflect upon that original feedback loop that you have the ability for that kind of reflection that can actually register as awareness of that reflection instead of just reacting to the reflection. You see, we have the ability to respond intelligently to what we recognize in the world, not just react to it. And so that is the distinction. And I think that is almost, from my point of view, it is kind of one of the basic definitions of being in the logoic chain is that you have access to intelligent infinity. In our case, through the spirit complex. I don't know how it works for the sun as sub-logos or the overall logos, but it's good enough for me. Now, I just want to say those are my definitions. So they are as flawed as they're limited, right? And if I find better definitions, I will gladly delete this whole recording.
Have you ever found, Barish or Jeremy, any reference to kind of, and I could be misunderstanding you, Barish, but kind of in the same sense that we can invest 2D and assist them? The same with thought forms. Like, is there ever a point when the thought form gains enough gravitational pull from the investment of energy that it does gain? Or have you just not? I'm just curious if that's even ever a possibility.
The way I was thinking about this is not that these thought forms are separate from me, but as I have more and more positive thoughts, more and more thoughts that are kind of like more love filled, I feel like I then also attract the help of the universe, the help of these beings that get attracted vibrationally to these thoughts. So it kind of builds upon itself and then gets supported, or I get supported, and that is very, very helpful. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. That thoughts as these thoughts become more love filled, as kind of more and more parts of myself I bring to light and integrate and accept, that I am able to also kind of get the help of a kind of broader body of energy that is kind of helping and uplifting.
Yeah. Important to understand investiture is occurring upon us, just as we invest our second density friends. So I'm really glad that you started out with kind of how we experience investiture. And I think most acutely we experience it by asking for help from our higher density friends who then can give us thoughts. Those thoughts can focus us on certain things. And only by doing that, only by kind of changing our attention, is any kind of negation of the thoughts we were thinking of before possible. Right? Like that's really the only way you could like not think of a pink elephant is to give me an idea of a blue elephant, right? Like with
The,
sorry, go ahead.
the mind needs to be open like a book is the phrase that I felt really compelled, you know, in a meditative state, right? You know,
Yeah.
that you are receptive
Yeah.
of inspiration.
Yeah. And it's because we have that ability to be receptive that we can work with the fact that the mind is a go-kart that only has a gas pedal and no brake, right?
Oh, I had never thought about it like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's my contention is that it's very positivist in the sense that it can only create, it can't undo, like for the sake of undoing. It can only create things that maybe by ancillary action that like dislodge centers of coherence in a thought form. Anyway, I'm getting weird. With respect to second density, Stephanie, I would really point you to that last Oxal that Richmond did, because they talk specifically of investiture. With second density, remember, okay, so for us, the thought forms we're getting are designed to help us polarize. For second density, it would stand to reason that the thought forms are designed to bring into awareness the spirit complex that is in potential in them.
So
And
kind of
that
apples and oranges.
it no, it's like it's a similar medicine, but it's used on different parts of the complex. Let's say that, right? Thoughts are the vehicle, and then but what those thoughts are doing are different things. If you don't have the ability to recognize yourself in the mirror, all of your thoughts are going to be things happening to you, not things that you're going to like choose, right? So investiture has a different character when you don't have the ability to truly choose, as it is when you finally do have that ability to reflect. And in your choice, you are unlocking potential directly, even if that potential is attenuated from what you would otherwise have if you understood yourself as the creator in toto, right? Like first you have to know yourself, then you have to accept yourself, and only then can you become the creator. And even then, like when you become the creator and you're in third density, are you just creating thoughts willy-nilly? No, I think you're actually a lot more focused and disciplined than you thought. Hope that makes sense.
Well, it reminds me, and I know there's a few parents that look like Elliot was on Kid Duty too. Um, when I first started considering thought forms, this was honestly the first time I had considered them as in the way that Ra and other Confederation beings described them. I was really kind of sad because I had never ever been introduced to thought forms in that way, that I can kind of pick and choose, that they aren't me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, and as a parent, it was really important for me to convey that to my child. You don't like, you're not just your anger, you're not just your jealousy. It's something that you can be aware of and you can choose. So I'm interested, and I had never had that concept before
Not only that,
myself. So I'm just curious if y'all had this before, or was your introduction to this, did it come with the law of one? Is it something that you try to pass on? I missed it in our culture. I just plain old missed it.
I read a lot of theosophical society stuff when I was a kid. That's the only way I knew about it. Until Ra mentions thought forms, and the Confederation mentioned thought forms.
I actually found the Buddhist philosophy to be very, very helpful here. I So I was just recently at a meditation retreat, and meditation retreats I also find incredibly helpful because you kind of observe for yourself how this whole thing works. Like if you could somehow, like this was a week-long silent retreat, after a couple of days, the mind quiets, and then you notice that you are not the thought itself, you are the observer of the thought. And we know that this is all mentioned constantly, but when you experience it, it kind of clicks that there is consciousness. And because consciousness is this kind of loving awareness, like very love-filled, but doesn't move itself. It is observing the thoughts that come in, the feelings that arise, the kind of sensations that are there, the sense perceptions of kind of touch, smell, kind of hearing, and all of that. And it is just knowing when they happen. So when you're kind of in this meditative state where you're kind of observing all of this, you know that thoughts will do all sorts of things because it's the mind's job. As an organ, mind will generate things, generate thoughts, and then we have a habit of getting entangled with these thoughts and then think that we are those thoughts, but then they don't really serve us. The moment we start kind of letting loose the grip on these thoughts a little bit, like thinking that they are your identity, instead just slightly step back into the seat of consciousness, step back into the observer seat, like then we don't get too attached to these thoughts, whether they are positive or negative. And then when we're not super attached, then you can say, okay, now I have a choice. I can choose to react. I can choose to accept things the way they are. And that accepting things the way they are is incredibly powerful, because you don't then feel like you need to push on some force. You need to push on the universe. You just say, okay, this is the way it is. This person is the way it is. The situation is the way it is. Given that, how can I see the love in this moment? How can I bring love into this moment? It becomes the relationship of us with the reality becomes more of a kind of flowy thing versus a kind of abrasive pushing thing. And to me, I never noticed any of this, of course, growing up. Only when I started doing these kind of intensive meditations, like then I noticed, oh, I'm observing my mind, I'm watching my mind, and the mind does all sorts of crazy things, jumps from one topic to the other. And the interesting thing is, you'll have thoughts that don't serve, and then they shift into something that's completely random. But if I get too entangled in the things that don't serve, I create a lot of suffering for myself. So if I could just step back a little bit, then things go well.
That would be really interesting to come up with a theory of the life cycle of these thought forms, because the way that they sort of like, I'm not sure that they change them in their nature so much as your relationship to them changes, but that's still itself like really interesting. You're right that a lot of times it's not so much about distance from the thought or binding yourself to the thought so much as like who you are and what you're thinking when you do that, right?
Yeah, it's a relationship to the thought.
Yeah, yeah.
That you're not the thought, but you're the holder of space, which is pretty awesome, actually.
It is, and how amazing that we still use these spatial concepts, even though we know that in the mind there's not really any such thing, right?
But I actually really like this analogy of the sky. That
Yeah,
consciousness is like the sky. So you're going to have clouds that come in, and then hurricanes that happen, and then they eventually disappear. They transform, and you're just observing all of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They kind of have like that. That's sort of like the virtue and vice of thought forms, is that they have their own energy.
Yeah.
It's not the same energy, but it is their own energy. So you can choose your relationship, how much you want your attention to be invested in them or not. Um, and that's what I wanted to say about the parenting thing, Stephanie, was I think one of the things that when I talk to parents, I mean, the thing that sort of subtly gets noticed is how hard it is to discourage kids from thinking what they're thinking, because you can only give it attention. You can't you can't withdraw attention from it and still feel like you're parenting. So you're constantly giving energy to whatever it is, negative or positive, the kid's thinking,
Oh yeah, yeah. I gotcha.
no matter what you do. And it's almost like you're a fertilizer and accelerant, not fertilizer, accelerant of whatever flame they're starting, right? Like whether it's good or bad. And all you can really do, there's very limited things that you can do that really get through sometimes, especially with
Well,
teenagers.
like my kiddo has some anxiety and he's real quick to go down the anxiety hole.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, I'm not going to tell you that that's wrong or right. I think those thoughts are valid, but we could also choose among these infinite thoughts. Like from a parenting perspective, like, hey, let's pick that one. What is that one? Does it work? Does it not work? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel more stressed?
Yeah.
Like, and just that act of giving him choice was something I did not ever know about.
You could see as a kid that if you were that if you recognize that, you might feel manipulated, right? But it's not true. It's not taking away your choice. It's just
Yeah.
working with the tool that you're bringing to the table, which is this, you only have the ability to think. You don't really have the choice to not think.
Hmm.
You can aim the hose wherever you want, but you can't turn the hose off. Except in meditation. Meditation is that one moment where you kind of let the hose run itself out, and then you're left with what the hose has been sort of spraying on. What a horrible analogy! To just accept it instead of trying to figure out what your relationship to it is. Should I accept it? Should I reject it? You could just, in a lot of ways, meditation is like moving more into that aura and atmosphere version of the thought, rather than grabbing the structure and being like, do I like this? What is
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah.
And I think there's also an important analogy here. I don't want to make it too concrete because it's very speculative, but if you think about the core distinction between experience in time space versus space time, space time is a very quantitative experience, and time space is a very qualitative experience. So it seems to me that in space time, we we sort of prefer form over atmosphere, and we do the exact opposite in time space. We reach into those qualitative, undifferentiated spaces of our experiences rather than like focusing on like the purest manifestation of them, because that's just a means to experience, and it's in the auras, it's in the atmospheres that we actually harvest the experience, it seems.
Mm.
Like these thoughts are kind of like the proximate emitters of everything that we then have as a life. They're not, it's not that they don't play any role. It's kind of like, wow, it's like it's like mistaking the light bulb for the light, right? We want the
Mm.
light. The light bulb is a means to the light. It's not itself the light. Have I exhausted everybody else as much as I've exhausted myself?
I'm
No,
curious what the others have to say. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead,
please.
Harish.
I have to drop off. I've
Yeah.
left the kids a bit for too long, but this is a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Good to see
Bye,
you.
bye.
Appreciate your contributions. Don't be a stranger, bud. And then number 4. All right. Any other thoughts? Anything at all?
Quite a few bouncing around. Uh, so it's Barish. Is that how you say his name?
Barish.
Barish. I'm sorry he had to drop off. That was was happy for him to bring in meditation. You did as well. What is it about meditation that clears the mind of thought? And that's an inroads, I think, to coherence. And I believe it was you, Stephanie, mentioning guardrails, right? Coherence is neither good nor bad, right? Coherence is the thing that provides us with stability and security, and coherence is also the energy of obtaining coherence can be experienced as a violence or an aggression.
Yeah.
Right. Like anxiety, for instance, right? There's an internal coherence to the accumulation of this kind of fictitious safety, or, like there's internal logics to things that drive them, and that can be bolstering or that can be a barrier, right? That can be kind of growing and nurturing, or that can kind of feel like parasitic, right? Um, and so that's the thing about thought forms that strikes me is that they're a pattern, right? So like if I can convince you that you need something, then you will go seeking for it, right? If I can convince you that you're not enough, you'll seek to become more. If I could convince you that you are enough, then you might stop some of the actions that you were doing. And so thought forms, they might have a tiny seed or genesis, right? But they're an offer of a pattern.
Yeah.
And that's the form part of it, right? There's a pattern that kind of needs to be played out. Now, in the space of meditation, or in any of the kind of attainments, so many of the patterns that drive us, one of the reasons why meditation can be difficult or painful or uncomfortable is because in the initial stages, like there's all of these things that are not getting fed, right? Well, it's like, oh, what about that project? Or, like that time that I embarrassed myself, or all sorts of things will come up as like, I'm hungry, feed me, right? But then eventually those things extinguish, like because we stop feeding them. And so the the thing that has struck me, that I think that's come to light for me, right, is that the form is a useful way of talking about those patterns and the kind of interconnectedness, um, right? But it is still thought that is created by us, right, in relation to these things that, I don't know, the drawing of the line between internal and external, I think, right? The thought forms could be our own creations. They could be experienced as kind of things that are offered to us by others, right? But it's the feeding or the not feeding of any kind of form with our thoughts, right? That kind of keep turning the wheel.
Yeah.
And then the meditation, if you can hit that place where there's nothing in there, right? Then those thought forms will have kind of withered away because you've ceased producing the thoughts that animate them, right? So in that kind of um, in that kind of vein, I think there are, like in the Buddhist tradition, um, teaching has all of the same characteristics of samsara, right? Like teaching happens in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But somewhere in there are thoughts that lead to the cessation of thought, right? Just like there are thoughts that lead to the kind of onus to think more and more and do more and more, right? And so the kind of balanced nature, or the kind of completion, right, of like, I'm going to set that down, right? That can come from a thought. Can come from a thought form, or it can come from kind of an abstaining from offering energy to it anymore. So that's what I've been working with.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think it's what you were talking about with respect to choosing your relationship to these thought forms. Like it works, like in the limited example of we're only dealing with thoughts that we generate, right? What happens when it's not just other third density mind body spirit complexes thoughts? What happens when it's something like investiture, or just thoughts coming from higher density beings of many different kinds? Like it's not as simple an issue then, but like, so what? The same principles apply. I just wanted to bring up that it's not only our own thoughts and only our neighbors' thoughts that we're dealing with respect to meditation.
Well, I do want to say the lack of simplicity could be traced to a deficiency in our conception of self and other, right? In that, right, it's always a parent self, a parent other, and this is possibly not a practical or useful thing to say, right? But
Well,
ultimately, it's all one, right? And
right, it's
so,
all
yeah,
one mind having
challenges,
all of these thoughts. Yeah.
yeah, the challenges that we might experience are these kind of pointers to where that, you know, like it could just maybe there's something that can be done or needs to be done about it, right? But that's the experience of separation.
The issue is that I don't have a directly communicatable experience of being at unity. I do have at least a partially communicatable experience of who I am right now. To me, that's the only difference. But like, I totally get what you're saying. Uh, I just feel I've been presumptive enough without trying to climb into the mind of the creator uh, at Unity. That's all I'm saying about that. I wanted to offer that I'm not sure that I agree, and I know this goes back on what I said earlier, but what I always tell people who ask me about meditation that it's not about stopping thoughts. It's about a different relationship to the thoughts that are going on, right? It's that sky analogy that Barish mentioned. The thoughts come in and the thoughts go. And I'm not having this relationship of I need to make sure that thought goes there. I need to make sure this right. I'm taking that hose of attention and I'm just kind of like dilating it so that it cannot give full uh, 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 attention that gives it ongoing place in my awareness, right? I'm not giving that uh, as a kind of free offering or a lack of care in what I'm doing. I'm taking more care. I'm not trying to control it, but I am trying to pull back and be like, I'm going to observe rather than experience these thoughts. That's a different thing, right? There's a difference between observing a thought and like thinking it. The generation versus the kind of like examination. It's funny because I wonder if thoughts didn't have these kind of discrete forms to them, if that would even be possible. We wouldn't be able to consider a thought out as such, but only as like a point in a continuum that would ever be shifting. And in truth, that is exactly what's happening. We have the illusion of this kind of like proximity that it's there, I'm here in some abstract way that allows us to choose a kind of way of binding ourselves to it. And that's what Ra talks about. They talk almost like magically about thoughts and thought forms as questions of binding, which has a long magical connotation there.
I mean, I think that's kind of what I would think I was getting at earlier, but not with the right words. My words didn't string together well. But there's so much like an errant thought would be like, oh, I like that color. But then there's the thought that you invest repeatedly again and again. Like to use something Elliot just said, oh my God, that time I was so embarrassed because I did X, Y, or Z. And you rehash that again and again. And so there is like, there seems to be intensity or energy. Like there's so much that we haven't dug into, but I think those thoughts can take on a life of their own. And then the more beings that invest into it, um, that takes it up a notch. I don't know, that stuff to me just really fascinates me, like how big thought forms can really get.
Absolutely. And y'all's enthusiasm to at least gesture at a language by which we could have a conversation about this is not trivial. It's not a trivial contribution to this work. Like, uh, I'm trying to come up with some like taxonomies and way and a language for how to talk about this. but remember, I'm always giving you the caveat that like the language limits as much as it frees, right? Like by giving you a definition, and like Oxal didn't like the definition that I offered at my first version of this presentation. They said they would work with it, but they don't necessarily see it as all encompassing. So it's important to understand how little we understand as we explore, so that we don't confuse ourselves more. That's all. That we allow ourselves to be wrong, so that we can avoid needless confusion by clinging to something that isn't serving us. I have a tendency to go with the what do you call it, the sunk cost fallacy. Once I've invested a lot of thought, like I remember a great example of this was either at the second or the third intensive. Um, from my Ray Stanford's channeled work, Fatima Prophecy and all that was very, very influential on me. And he had a concept of spirit, mind, body, that spirit projects down through mind into body. And so those are the layers. And so I always thought that in the same way that body is a creature of mind, hey, Elliot, could you mute?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Thought it was.
Just as body is a creature of mind, Ross says, I just assumed, well, then mind must be a creature of spirit, right? And I remember Q saying very directly to me, through me, like, we'll work with this as much as we can, but this really isn't the way it works. And that's what it took for me to say, like, I need to like really think freshly about this and open up to a new way of looking at it. And that's the model that I have now, which is mind is the fundamental structure. Body is kind of like a distortion of mind, such that it has these like characteristics that make it seem distinct. Spirit is this distortion of mind that has these characteristics that make it seem distinct. But they're all really part of mind at the end of the day, because I think at the end of the day, mind is really the only thing. Mind is the simplest substance of the creator before we just get to unity and no substance. I might be wrong about that, but that's kind of the mental model I use to think about things now. And you know, it was a big shakeup in my sort of like personal ontology of how I think about these things to accept that. So I'm always trying to be open to these times when the Confederation says, Jeremy, you're not getting this right. And when they give me a hint, I take it seriously, which is I give caveats. I keep doing the best thinking I can, but I try to hold it as loosely as I can. Because if the map is running me in the walls, then you throw away the map. You know?